Okay. Hello, everyone. On behalf of the counselors of real estate, it is a distinct privilege to welcome you to this session, What's Next for Real Estate and Life Experience webinar series. Thank you for joining us. I'm Michel Couillard, the 2020 and 2021 Global Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate. The Counselors is a distinguished international group of accomplished leaders within the real estate landscape, solving the world's most complex real estate challenges. Experienced, innovative, and credentialed problem solvers, counselors practice in 20 countries and offer expertise in more than 50 real estate disciplines across all asset types and classes. Each has earned the prestigious CRE designation. This webinar series represents the very essence of the compelling thought leadership for which the counselors is known. To learn more about the organization and its 1,000 CRE members, professionals, please visit cre.org. While attendees will be muted during the course of today's event, we are encouraged to utilize the Q&A feature should you wish to submit a question. Your participation is welcome, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. Your Q&A feature is at the bottom of your screen. Today, we're grateful to hear from Tom Shirtcliffe, CRE, and Andrew Bennett, AIA, who will share how to reimagine the workplace through space utilization models that are powered and prevailing technology and innovation. Tom is co-founder and principal of Intelligent Building LLC. Intelligent Buildings was founded in 2004 and provides smart buildings advisory services, as well as managed services for new development and existing portfolio. Tom is an entrepreneur and executive with broad experience in Fortune 500 managements, small businesses, and venture capital funded startups. Since co-founding Intelligent Building LLC, he has become a recognized expert in commercial real estate technology consulting and risk management. Since joining Boca Powell in '95, Andrew Bennett, AIA, has been a creative force behind the firm's full range of architectural and interior design services. He's known for fostering Boca Powell's atmosphere of teamwork and collaboration, planning mock designs exercise that hone the team's creative skills. Prior to joining Boca Powell, Andrew spent several years designing projects in Hawaii and Australia and ventured on a 30-country tour to visit significant architectural landmarks around the world. Welcome, Tom. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michel.
I'll now pass the first part of the program to you.
Thanks, Michel. It's awesome to be here today. And undoubtedly, everyone on this call is very pandemic fatigued and certainly Zoom meeting fatigued. So I'll do my best not to add to that. Just a real quick check. Can everyone see my screen right there?
Yep.
I'm assuming, yep. I am one of the 4 partners in Boca Powell, a 44-year-old architectural practice based here in Dallas, Texas, where I am today. If you check out our website, we just debuted a new feature called Forecast that summarizes many of the subjects I'll touch on today. We have a lot of really talented people in our 100-person firm, and they've written a lot of good white papers on a lot of the things I'm going to touch on, some of which are my ideas, but many of which of the kind of challenges that firms across the country are dealing with for the last 7 months. We're getting closer to a year now, sort of 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. The images on the left of the screen are some of my personal greatest hits specific to corporate office design and a focus on workplace design. Equally important or more germane to the conversation today would be the interior workplace experiences that go along with the exterior architecture. So, that's a snapshot of some of our greatest hits. The reason I'm here today is really because last spring when the pandemic hit, the AIA reached out to our firm, and I was honored to participate in a series of workshops and charrettes that helped, it was 2 or 3 layers down really in order to help reoccupancy assessment tool that the AIA was creating for all of their users and stakeholders. And what's really cool about what the AI is doing constantly is they're evergreening all of the things on their website. So on the right-hand side of this image, the reopening of America, the strategies for safer buildings. If you guys go to the AI website, there's tons of really good resources there as well. And so again, I can't say enough about how a lot of why I'm here today is fueled by that experience with the AIA last spring. Some of the thoughts that you're going to see Actually, I'm hitting the wrong button here. There's the AI images there. Some of the thoughts you're going to see today are mine, and then there's many more that are kind of from my colleagues in my workplace and from my experiences on a real day-to-day basis with our clients. This notion of a continuum of experiences is really important. This idea of adapting to a new normal. I feel like for architects and for designers and anybody in our real estate industry, the idea of creating trust in the built environment is really what we're all about. And so, hold on 1 second. Getting used to this, the way this is formatted. A continuum of experiences relates to the notion that in this new normal created by the worldwide pandemic, 6 degrees of separation has really become 0 degrees of separation. 6 feet apart is really kind of what we're talking about these days, right? The best tools that architects and designers have at their disposal is to target rate limiting factors, design elements that reduce the vulnerability to COVID-19 or the next pandemic virus. As I mentioned, we have a focus on workplace design. And so that's what I'm going to really focus on here today as well. But no matter where we are in this continuum of experiences of our lives, we must connect back to the whole spectrum. You know, this idea that, you know, from home to stadium, I'm a music fan, I'm a sports guy, and the idea of going to a stadium right now is a little bit iffy, right? But for all of us design professionals, we've got to be working on, you know, every kind of spectrum, from our house where we feel safe, where much of us have been working at home, to this idea that we're going to, you know, really get back to business in the real world, right? And so I want to credit Peter Exley, who recounted the following story during our AIA work sessions. There's an iconic study on relieving the stress that students feel in anticipation of a school field trip. The study had 3 sample groups on a visit to the zoo. Group 1 was oriented on the animal behavior and other scientific constructs, and the second group was oriented to the pragmatics of the visit, what they would have for lunch, how they would circulate through the zoo, and where the bathrooms were. The third group had no prep. After the visit, the students who recalled most and tests as highest were you can guess at group 2. We need to prepare building users to use, you know, for using the methodologies and celebrating how buildings are navigated and used, and therefore demystifying what the experience will be. Tom's going to talk a lot more in depth about technology, but, you know, as architects and designers, a roadmap to the using of our facilities is never more important than right now. Smartphones and other smart devices are being used to assist in combating the spread of infectious diseases. With building security and health in mind, these devices can help monitor the overall health of its occupants. Hospitals and airports are already incorporating temperature detection systems using thermal cameras that help to identify potentially symptomatic people. These symptoms can scan up to 2,000 people an hour with automated alert systems that will notify the security system and individual identified. We're reading in the news every day about different technologies that people are incorporating, and there's so much computing power in the world right now that it's undoubtedly, you know, technology is going to help us solve a lot of things. But architecturally, as a designer, I can't help but use a few case studies today, a few little small commercials for Boca Pound, the work that we're doing. The images on your screen right now are a case study of a project that was being designed in concept and in schematic design right as the pandemic started. And so I started exploring some ideas like using the building entry as a filter. Communicating stairs are always something that our firm tries to champion, and the idea that people use stairs more is certainly a wellness aspect for getting steps in. And but it's also a place now I think people feel a little safer than elevators. I think elevators are one of the key points of it's really tough to put a lot of people in an elevator and feel that trust or that safety. And then last but not least, we've all, and I'll touch on this a lot, we've all really figured out sort of the love of outdoors and the feeling of health and wellness outdoors. And so generous outdoor areas in our workplace design is something that we've really been pushing at Boca Pound. The idea of throttling came up a lot in our AIA work sessions. There are multiple bottleneck points in buildings that need careful consideration: entries, elevators, stairs, restrooms, coffee bars, and break areas. Throttling must be considered at every component of design and every scale of design. Extreme examples being loading and unloading of airports, airplanes, stadiums and arenas, cruise ships, and large gathering places like stores, malls, and restaurants. It seems daunting, but even since May, when this discussion happened, we've seen creative solutions start to rise up all around the world. Oops, went too far. Back. These are some really cool classic examples of building entry used as a filter. The architectural term for those columns that come to the ground is pilotis. These were done starting with somebody named Le Corbusier. They've been studied throughout mid-century modernism and on up until now, but they do a really cool thing. They create greater space at the ground for people to decompress, figure out where they're going, use technology to get them into the building. I think that you're going to see these kinds of examples in planning come to the forefront. It's pretty critical that elevators be used for vertical conveyance reasons, but in low to mid-rise buildings, it seems, and we do a lot of those, it seems a new emphasis and design focus should be on the usage of large open stairs. Certainly security and safety and touch-free components would be key elements to these experiences, but there are very few workplace activities more healthy than walking up and down stairs. My least favorite challenge we have in front of us is this idea of elevators, but predictive call entry upon building arrival, or what they call destination selection, personalized profiles for end users on their PDAs and their phones, other Bluetooth technology things that happen within the cabs are kind of things that are really coming to the forefront. Some things that are being experimented by a lot of companies are certainly the use of more antimicrobial surfaces, UV lighting inside of an elevator, and higher level of filtration in the filtration systems. The UV lighting thing is interesting because you would think that you could just zap that cab every time, but the UV that would give us a really bad sunburn in 20 minutes, the UV lighting that it takes to kill these kind of pathogens is 10 times greater than that. So anything that people are putting into these building systems that's UV related has to be tuned to when there are not people in the elevator or not people using those spaces. And again, I think there's a lot of things going on in the world of exploring that. In that stair environment that I talked about, here's some really expressive examples of buildings that are using the stairs to navigate the building, and it becomes a design feature, certainly, and it becomes a place where people can create more community and more intersection with each other. It makes the experience of being in the building even more fun. Another real-time example that we're exploring right now is this use of what's called a scissor stair. And maybe in a building that we're exploring right now, we might think about the idea that one of the runs of the stairs is always going up and the other run is always going down. It's yet to be seen whether or not we're going to integrate that, because I should probably stop right now and say that a lot of the things that we're talking about that relate to new normal design or post-pandemic design have premiums associated with that. And so those, I'm sure, will be some of the questions that come up in the Q&A portion of this. But the idea that we want to design buildings that don't look like they were designed during a pandemic, but we want to design buildings that, again, instill trust in the people that are using them. This next piece is really about the outdoor air and the sort of the comfort that people get in that. If there's one fundamental lesson we've all learned from this pandemic, it's the rediscovery of the psychological and real effects of fresh air, our love of nature. Now more than ever, technology can connect us to work anywhere, including outside the walls of our buildings. So with good Wi-Fi, we could sit out on a patio near our building. We can even, tap into other Wi-Fi, and there was certainly a trend for people working at Starbucks before this all happened, and certainly in co-working spaces where they were tapped into their the cloud or the mothership of their home offices and things like that. This is an example of a building that we're doing in Dallas right now that's about to top out this month. It's a 17-story office building, but it's got balconies, terraces, patios. A lot of these design features were done before the pandemic. And again, there was already a trending towards being outside. Here's another view of that building. Roof terraces are really great for tenants. They like to hang out there. Certainly with social distancing, we're working on, and we literally had a furniture meeting yesterday to talk about the kinds of furniture that'll be out on this terrace. In this particular building, we have a ground floor retail, so there'll be some outdoor cafe areas or beer garden areas that people can kind of hang out in. And then a very unique factor to this building is this idea that we have a 1.3 acre park that we the owner and developer decided to build this park as a connector between the train station and our sports arena, which this building happens to be on the third side of that. And so to have a 1.3 acre park right next to your building, I think, is a really nice amenity, but also something, again, where people can spread out, continue to work and do some things like that. So let's move our way from this sort of these exterior planning ideas into some more of these interior workplace notions. Much of what I just described was about navigation through buildings, beginning with the entry process and the journey to your personal workspace. These key considerations on this slide relate more to getting down to the business at hand and working more in a more healthy workplace. The word flexibility is overused and often not really solved for, but it's more important now than ever going into a new normal. So we got to keep fighting for flexibility. If we've touched on several of the other key considerations, but I actually touched on several of them as it related to the getting in and out of buildings. But a new normal reality will be the engagement of graphics and wayfinding much earlier in the design process. So another key point is that, you know, as architects and engineers, we engage consultants at different points during projects. And the pandemic has taught us that there are many consultants like the Tom Shercliffes of the world that really need to be in early on to be talking about smart buildings, graphics and wayfinding, security, things like that. Restroom designs are one of the key, that's another one of those throttling positions. That's the second most sensitive area, in my opinion, after elevators. I believe people are dealing with, this all over the place, is like that kind of subtle nuance of, using public restrooms in office buildings. So designers all over the country are exploring new planning ideas to create a healthier experience. As I was looking at the AI website, they have some of those same tools on there. These graphics on the screen right now were created by our team here at Boca Pal. There's some similarities to what other designers are doing, but it's really important that we think about new ways to do it. Some of this is actually influenced by hospitality design. There's a lot of single-use toilet rooms with sink and toilet in hospitality design, hotels and restaurants, and I think that's going to creep more into the office environment, because there's a sense of you're there alone, solitude-wise, and there's a sense of cleaning, the ability to clean it, certainly schedule cleaning and things like that. This is a typical Boca Pal 25,000 square foot North Texas office floor plate. They're all over the country. There's a lot like these. You have traditional ways of doing restrooms on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is just one idea of starting to break that into two pieces, maybe create single-use toilet rooms. I love these kind of graphics that we've all been seeing around the country, how people feel safe. And obviously, this notion that all of these people are outside, this is how they were able to connect with people, and they're all socially distanced. I think that kind of message is going to sort of creep into the workplace pretty quickly. Furniture and all the furniture companies are just scrambling to figure out ways to have people feel comfortable and trusting. Certainly taller panels is one way, but again, cost premiums. If we have a client right now that says, hey, let's do all offices for all 300 employees. Well, is that really going to be feasible? Is that really going to help their business efficiencies and people collaborate? I'm not sure that's really the right answer. The unique workstations on the far right of this image actually work for social distancing. They're used a lot in the IT world and technology world, but we've been exploring these things with clients, and we're going to continue to explore them because we're right in the middle. We're really kind of in the first inning, right, of a 9-inning game as it relates to the pandemic and design challenges. Another quasi case study is Southwest Airlines. We've been working for them for about 10 years on their corporate spaces. They have very unique floor plates that are way bigger than that North Texas floor plate that I showed you before. Their floor plates are 65,000 square feet. They have a lot of people on the floor. That creates a certain amount of nervousness in a pandemic, but to flip it around the other way, maybe a larger floor plate allows them to really space out as they bring people back to the office. So having more indoor air conditioned spaces that they can divide up and spread out in might be a little easier than in this 26,000 square foot floor plate. Here's some examples of another client that we're exploring the idea of social distancing. These are real-time diagrams showing how on the left-hand side, you might have currently 205 people sitting on that floor. And then in a post-pandemic, just space them out kind of mentality, there's 109. Well, that's a big hit to the efficiency of that floor plate. With those unique workstations that I just showed you, you can actually still get 186 out of that the original 202. So we're trying to be creative in ways that use existing real estate, existing space, and figure out, again, that magic flexibility. And then last but not least, from a interior space planning notion, is most office buildings, I would say probably 75 to 80% of them, that are mid-rise to high-rise. Use a traditional center core planning aspect because it's really efficient for multi-tenants. It's efficient for lobby access to those multi-tenants. But one of the things that we've been, and in those buildings that have a center core, you typically have an outside air shaft that's feeding down to all the fan rooms on all the floors. That air is typically shared throughout the building. Again, this is sort of pre-pandemic, but we've really jumped on the advantages of it post-pandemic or during the pandemic. We're doing an offset core on that building in Victory in Dallas, Texas. And the mechanical room then can pull outside air on each floor. And so now the outside air that's being pulled into each floor is then used only by that floor. And that's a unique marketing thing that we're doing with these guys. So this is a really cool image that I'll finish with. It's Granite Park in Plano, Texas, where Boca Palace had the great honor to design 8 major projects over the last 22 years with the same developer in a 67-acre mixed-use master plan. As you might imagine, over that period of time, there are literally hundreds of digital systems in these buildings. And from building to building, there's no chance that they all speak to each other. The developer did have the foresight to have a fiber optic loop installed for continuity and connectivity. But keep this in mind, as this scale of project in mind, as my esteemed colleague Tom Shercliffe now regales you and us with stories about the importance of intelligent building systems, which now more than ever add a critical layer of the trust that I mentioned our building users want in us, the design community, and the building developers and owners. I'll finish with this kind of fun graphic. You know, there's this pendulum that's happening right now. Where do you guys, I'll finish with a question. Where do you want to be on the pendulum? There is this notion that the pandemic gets solved, all pandemics end, and we can return to the way it's always been. And then there's this horrible kind of bleak apocalyptic future that we all don't want to be a part of, but somewhere in the middle is the answer. And it's going to sort of rely on a lot of things like Tom's about to talk about. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone. For stopping.
That was fantastic. Thanks, Andrew. And you said that, while I'm pulling this up, I'll mention you said that, you know, words that we haven't seen much before, like social distancing. And tell me if you can see that presentation. You seeing that, Andrew?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so new words like social distancing, and until last week when you and I talked, I hadn't heard stairs can be fun.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of new things, and after seeing your presentation, I'm convinced now. Also, I'd like to emphasize some things you said that were really important for the audience. You mentioned that in addition to design, methodology, navigation, and use were, I think, the 3 words you use, and I think that is really important because as you and I have talked quite a lot, architecture, engineering, and technology now in this conversation are one thing.
More than ever.
The stairs are cool, but how do you know which one goes down and up? And how do you have sensors that know who went down and if you're going the wrong way? Yeah, we'll get into some other use cases later, but it's really interesting how much we are talking now with friends like Andrew in the very beginning, where it used to be a little more sequential, and now it seems to be all one thing. Just 20 seconds here on who we are for perspective. We're a advisory services and managed services company, and our unique little place in the world is that's all we do. So a lot of times when you hear smart building companies or services, they also do engineering, they also do IT services, or maybe even their core job. They may also do property management, et cetera. So I joke we're the only ones smart enough or dumb enough for 17 years to do just one thing, and that is smart building advisory managed services at scale. And that has helped us, I think, when it comes to this type of a situation, as well as, pardon the logo soup here, but I wanted to get the sense that our perspective comes from many different owner and manager types and use types. So this is meant to show, you know, lots of corporate, commercial, government, utility, higher ed, and that really gives us an interesting perspective of the common threads and the common principles that should be in place throughout. And I'll just make a quick point. That a lot of the things that we do and advise on now during a pandemic and these what we call facility public health use cases start with the same principles we did 17 years ago when it was just about energy efficiency. And then even a few years after that, when it was all about carbon and not just talking about energy specifically. And then it was, then it moved into 2008 and 9. It was all about every nickel during the recession. And then when the recovery came, it was all about the occupant experience. And now, of course, facility public health. But the point I'm making in this presentation is going to give you a sense that there are some fundamentals and some capabilities that you can have and probably do have that you can utilize now. And I'll just segue by saying, when this started at the beginning of the year, we were talking to lots of our customers. Obviously, we have really large customers, both in new development and existing portfolios. And we kind of distilled it down to these three things needed to occur in what they should do in our advisory. And that was, one, you had to first create confidence, and you had to legitimately do that. You have to create confidence to return to building. Was that in May, or is that in August, or is that not till next year? But whatever it is, you've got to create confidence for them to return to the building. Second was, you had to reduce I'm going to only say half of this. You had to reduce the risk, of course, for owners, managers, and occupants. But also, regrettably, there's a whole liability phase coming. I think we've already seen little bits and pieces of it out there. So we've got to be mindful of that right now. And then third, nobody with any size building or portfolio is going to just go buy a bunch of all new stuff and rip and replace and totally redesign everything. So you're going to have to look at your existing systems, the assets you have, the connections, the contractors, and leverage that as much as you can. So that's kind of the backdrop here. And I put over here on the side, whether that's in an existing portfolio or a planned new development. What I mean by that is, if you had a planned development, Andrew, I've talked about this, you weren't planning on, maybe you weren't planning on all these, UV things and the air ionizers, and maybe they can be a part of it, but you got to first look at the building you intended and say, how can I leverage that? So the other thing I want to mention, just for context here, is that we on this call are talking about facilities, and I shouldn't have put just facility management, but also facility design or building design. And the other aspects inform it, but they're a lot of times their own buckets. Your HR policy for your employees. We don't, in our business, and Andrew, we don't dictate whether or not an employee can take somebody's temperature or not. An employer, that's a swim lane, if you will. The clinical side of it, of course, is its own thing, and then government policy. But we're informed by all that. So what we found in our work was, in our customers, which is a pretty big slice. Our existing customers now have a total of 6 billion square feet. So we got a really good feel for this. And we found that almost everybody in the City News there has a COVID task force. And when it distilled down to the facilities, we were able to really identify these personas. And so this has been a useful way for us to communicate with folks. First, there was the Valeries of the world who said, okay, right now there's not many people in my building, but I've still got contractors and facility staff and all that coming in and out. Let's practice the Hippocratic oath and first do no harm. What am I doing with those people that have to maintain a low occupancy building? And especially when people start coming back, that's just a reality of building management. Then the Andres of the world said, well, as I said earlier, I've got a bunch of digital systems and great contractors and connections. How am I going to leverage that? And then we found there was the Daniels of the world that said, all right, that's great, you two, but I've got to have actual public health use cases coming out of this thing, or I'm not going to create confidence for people to return. And then there's our good friend Ted back there. So that's all nice, but once you guys pile all this stuff up together, I've got to manage this building portfolio going forward. So we had to really, the short story of that is we have to consider the value chain here of cost investment, existing infrastructure, workflow, property management, and of course, getting results. So the first thing on Valerie is really it's in some ways the most narrow piece of this, but it's not making your building management staff and contractors any more part of the problem. And at best, in the second bullet there, you can see whatever you're going to do for them is support the tenant and occupant policies and the government regulations. So we at least want to support that. And this is not meant to be a commercial, but just one thing that we're doing with our customers, we have an app where just for contractors, I mean, it can be used for anybody, but the point was for the contractor community to do at least the CDC screening and it can change the questions based on policy of the building or the customer, and get a QR code that makes it clear that they've answered, they're clear to come in this day or for 48 hours or whatever you want to say. And it does two things, as we said at the beginning of this. One, it communicates a policy of the building to the contractor just by nature of answering the questions. And also it supports a liability limiting liability in the future, because every single time a contractor does this, they have testified, I should say, attested to those answers. So you're now dealing with liability by doing this one simple thing. So Andre, as we said earlier, he wants to inventory what he has, because I think we all could probably quickly agree that especially in decent sized portfolios or buildings, it's not even always clear what systems and contractors and connections are all in the building, whether it's for a liability or to create an opportunity. So as quick and nimble as you can, an inventory of what the clay is you have to work with. And the second bullet there is that you've probably seen a lot of this in the news, pick your study. Hacking is up, I'll just pick an average of all the studies, 300% related to and during the pandemic. And to get a little deeper there, I can tell you that our customers, where we do phishing campaigns for the contractors, and they are opening phishing emails at twice the rate of the general public. So this may not seem like an obvious point, but during confusion and public issues and pandemics, that's when the cyber thieves are out there and the troublemakers. So don't build on a house of cards, and don't really get so focused on one thing that you can't occupy the building for a reason other than in public health. Then we said there's Daniel, who says, okay, now I've got my contractors, at least I've got that a little programmatic process going there. I know what I've got. Now what you want to do is create these use cases. And I will say that, and Andrew and I talked about this, a UV light cleaning system is not a use case, it's a system. And I'll explain further here. So use cases, we put them in categories. So by the way, nothing on the screen really is an energy efficiency or an occupant experience category. We're in the public health category. We're not even in the wellness category. We're in the public health category. And then subcategories of that are, which are different, are contractors, occupants, systems, and even environmental. So I'll give you a couple quick examples that a touchless experience might be starting in the parking control system, but certainly with the access control system that may also connect to your, Andrew alluded to this earlier, to your destination dispatch elevator. And he also mentioned wayfinding and signage. So if I were to connect the parking control with some license plate identification, the access control to me, to the destination dispatch elevator and signage and wayfinding, I might have a truly touchless use case that involve 5 different systems. So I really like for folks to kind of be thinking about this. Don't just go, whether it's smart buildings or public health, don't just go digging around for systems and say, that's cool, how could I use that? Start with, hey, do I want a touchless experience? Is that part of what I'm trying to do? And satisfy that use case. Same with social distancing, let's say. That's not anymore just a sign on the wall. That might use your existing CO2 sensors that you had for other reasons that can tell you about people density. That might use occupancy sensors that you had in conference rooms. We might also do things like Andrew showed this super cool thing about, only outside air coming into the floor of one tenant. Well, we're having conversations about when you do a conference room reservation, not only does it get Andrew's only outside air on that floor, but it also creates positive air pressure in that room. And so, you're not getting anybody else's air, and you know that nothing else is coming in. So those are use cases. And I'd encourage you, and actually it's a relief to people who don't enjoy technology like me, to be able to just talk about sort of in, for lack of a better phrase, English terms and business terms and real estate terms. What do you want to happen? And then finally on this page, I'll note that the environmental is, we feel strongly that's part of the new normal. So let's just suppose there's a vaccine and sort of COVID God willing, kind of fades to the side a little bit, there is this now increased awareness of just the environmental conditions. Surfaces, are they clean? Is the humidity right? Because the body likes higher humidity, buildings like lower humidity. Is there Legionella in my water? So I think you're going to see more use. And then of course there's the whole well conversation, but that's really the use case perspective. And I will add to this example that I said earlier. We worked on a very large building in New York in the Hudson Yards development. They're the largest private development in the history of the United States. And one of the biggest buildings in there we worked on, we obviously didn't plan for a public health situation, but we created these principles that we mentioned earlier, we've been doing for many years, that have gone from priority to priority. So in this case, we had this converged building with open protocols and all this flexibility to create use cases. And a use case we didn't anticipate was that the access control card, and this is what you're looking at here on a CMBC feature on that building, this is the access control system, not the elevator system. And so after the fact, we had the access control system telling the user, the employee, which elevator to go to. So now they had, unplanned, with just a little bit of programming, now a touchless experience. So it was really a sort of vindication of that changing priorities if you did building technology correct. Just a couple left here. So here's our guy Ted again. So we also want to encourage people to be thinking about the ongoing workflow and property management reality of the building. So you may now be doing contractor and staff screening that needs workflow and management reporting. You may have done some things with your contractors and your building systems now to ensure you have strong passwords, to ensure your systems are backed up, to maybe they're doing more remote access than they were before. There's this kind of the cybersecurity component here. If we created those use cases where I have the parking to the access control, to the destination dispatch elevator, to the digital signage, that's a sequence of operations that has to be maintained in property management. And then, of course, we mentioned the environmental monitoring. That's better not done as little silos. It's better done as part of the way you manage the building and the KPIs and the value proposition to the occupants. And maybe just to summarize it all, if just as one way to look at all this, if you were going to start now and say, I'm ready to roll, you'd first, Hippocratic oath, you deal with your contractors and what they're doing. Then you'd leverage what you have. And I want to make a quick note here. We certainly don't mean that you would not be including some things like UV and ionization and surface testing and these kind of things, but they would be filling in for the use cases that you want. And you certainly don't want all new. And then you'd create that little template in that profile and you would stamp that across your portfolio, because this is a case where we'd rather be an inch deep and a mile wide, or maybe 2 inches deep and a mile wide, rather than just doing one building great and not paying attention to other buildings. When you have a portfolio responsibility, you really need a programmatic, repeatable approach. And then of course, monitor and measure after that. And with that, I will yield the floor back to our gracious host. And thanks for the time on that.
That's awesome, Tom.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Andrew. So we have a few questions here. I'll start with the first one that popped up. As the pandemic has matured, actually that'll be both for you, Tom, and Andrew. And as the pandemic has matured, things that dominated early discussions like temperature taking and nightly deep cleaning have not proven very relevant in preventing spread. To what extent do you think that early design solution like spread out decks and temperature sensors will have long-term impact post-vaccine? And the second question to that is, compared to the basics that no touch doors, faucets, or good air cleaning. So I guess Andrew, you could start with this on the design aspect and perspective of it.
The interesting thing that happened in the last 7 months is a bunch of, for lack of a better term, knee-jerk reactions. The deep cleaning that we were doing, we recently, just using our own 100-person company as an example, we were doing deep cleaning every weekend on Saturday. We've suspended that now because of the exact reason the question was posed. It's not being deemed as it wasn't being deemed as something that was really, surfaces became less of an issue. Another example of something that has become more norm, and what will, this pandemic is going to teach us a lot of things. And so Asia and Europe was full of sliding door entries into buildings, and they had a lot of product types. It didn't look just like a grocery store slider or, nicer products. And so some companies, we've all had economic challenges here, but there's going to be companies taking off with new solutions to this touchless. Those things are going to stay. They're going to stay around, and there's going to be planning ideas that stick around. Like I think sliding doors in entry into buildings is the big one. I think there will probably be, if we were all could crystal ball this and we were all smart enough to come up with an idea and then make a lot of money on it, I think there'll be some very unique monitoring systems on temperature taking and things like that. That's why I mentioned airports and other places that have been experimenting with it. But I think the school is out on the science and whether or not that's really telling you whether or not somebody has just an average cold versus a severe virus. It's a tough one because it's a broad spectrum. But I think Tom can probably add on to that answer, in much more depth than I do.
Yeah. Well, sure. A couple thoughts. I would say when it comes to things like taking temperatures, the first thing you should do is determine what kind of stakeholder group you are in. If you're in a company, that's an HR policy. You can more or less do what you want. If you're not, you should be very careful that CDC questions anyone can ask. There's government regulations that were reissued in March of this year. That means that's not part of HIPAA. So anybody can ask the CDC questions. But when you take a temperature, you've just gotten in the diagnosis game, and now you're in a liability position.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't first consider whether it's good or bad. I'd consider, are you a stakeholder that's allowed to do that or wants to do that for a liability perspective? As far as the spread out of the desk go, that's certainly, Andrew showed you some fantastic designs for that. I would say it also relates very much to the new way of working. And I don't think, Andrew and I have talked about this, I don't think the pendulum is going to swing. People are coming back, they're already talking about it, but it has created greater awareness of the flexibility for work at home and in the office. So I think the spread out is going to be a little bit of a I don't want a cold, just because it's not COVID, and I don't want the flu just because it's not COVID. So I think that's part of this awareness. And then finally, that all relates to the questions, the new normal. And I know Andrew and I've talked that we think the new normal, the pendulum moves, but not all the way. This is just going to be smarter, more flexible, a little bit more spread out, because why wouldn't you want to be anyway?
We've touched a bit in the sense that you raised the point that both in the design and on the technical side of things, there's obviously major investment on the landlord or investor's perspective, and also on the space user. Let's talk for a minute about the landlord's perspective here. With your clients, Andrew, how are you, advising your clients as to the premium implication and all the different changes that you would be bringing to an existing portfolio, for example, or existing assets? And then obviously planning new concepts, new projects, it's a different ballgame. You're planning it from the get-go, but on the existing portfolios, how do you advise your clients this way?
We have fielded many calls from people that wanted to deal with existing conditions, but I think that for the most part, a lot of existing conditions are being done by the property managers, operations teams, the real estate companies that are managing buildings. They certainly have a lot of resources, and they know what their CapEx expenditures are before, during, and after, where they're going with it. Just as important for us has been this idea that if we had buildings that were on the boards or just about to break ground or under construction, we had people trying to figure out what the premiums were going to be. And it was a little bit like they had their hands tied behind their back, because if you don't do anything, then the perception is going to be that your building's not going to have that trust factor that I talked about. And so a lot of developers and owners have really scrambled to sort of what they would say, do the right thing. But they're doing the right thing for multiple reasons, certainly for the public health that Tom's talked about a lot, which is everybody wants everybody to have a good well-being. But then at the end of the day, too, it's still a business case about how do I position my building to be the right kind of building for for these end users. And so I still see this as three types of real estate plays going forward. I see it as companies that are going to do a lot more remote working because they figured out, even people that were naysayers on it, they figured out it does work. So they might shrink their real estate, their leases a bit. And then there'll be some that actually take more space because they want to do this spacing out thing. And then there'll be the one right in the middle, which is kind of like you're just keep on going right the way we were going before, because maybe a vaccine solves this for the next, we would hope this is the only one in our lifetime, but man, we might have one 2 years from now. We might have COVID 22 or 23. It's open to everyone's eyes around the world, I believe, pretty wholeheartedly.
Plus, I guess your CapEx program can be spread over 2 or 3 years. So
yeah, and certainly as an architect and designer, once we finish the building and hand it over to an owner, we're not involved in that as much. Now, we certainly like to think we have the creative solutions to help them figure out some things that when we got to move things and redesign things, graphics companies and printing companies have been killing it in the last 7 months. So, but they're not good graphics because they weren't designed into it. They're all band-aided, right?
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, you said something that's really important. You touched on just a second ago that I think the audience should keep in mind. And you said versus public health. And I just, now, unfortunately, it's really important we delineate between,
well, I learned that from you.
There's and then there's public health, and there's environmental, which is not either one of those. I mean, the indoor air quality and water and these kind of things. And so we have to start segmenting those things a little bit now, because I've heard so many people, when we're talking about facility public health, right? They say, oh yeah, we're doing well. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, that's good. That's really good. But that's not specifically relating to some of the things we've talked about today. And I would say also, Michelle, to the question of money and who pays, we're advising the landlords and property managers to think about it in 3 buckets. One is first the low, no cost things you can do. Some of the things I discussed were just connecting systems that already existed and how you have a use case, right? And now you've done something good, but it was low or no cost. And even things like screening contractors and getting your cybersecurity, some of that stuff just good practices and really doesn't cost much. The second one is, yes, what is the new normal? There is going to be at least a slight new normal for the landlord investment or the property manager expectation. But there's a third category too, and that is sort of the TI option, right? So maybe we're not including UV and ionizing air, or we're not planning on you having your own outside air on your. So there's a third category that jointly, let's say a landlord and a tenant could decide that the tenant wants to do. So I think low, no cost, new normal for landlords and property managers, and then this third bucket where it could be a combination of TI, top end stuff.
Just to comment on wellness and public health, Tom. I guess wellness, the way I see it, is an individual pursuit to a certain extent, associated with an active process, but it's more individually focused, where public health is more about protecting and improving health of people and in their communities. And so you're
more societal,
or even the office occupants in general.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that is right definitionally. I would say in today's context, public health, I think people mean stopping something bad from happening, right. Whereas well might be making something better than it currently is. Yeah. If I just say it in general. Yeah. So
it's a good fundamental.
I have a question on space share, sharing, co-working and shared space. Even during the pandemic, with so many global surveys and studies done during the last 8 months, most office users are still trending away from dedicated private office and still moving towards shared and collaborative space. So now and going forward, I guess, with the post-COVID environment, how will co-working and shared space concept work from a design and the density perspective, I guess, Andrew, first, and then innovation and public health from Tom's perspective?
I think that if you create a building that has these systems, and I like also the way Tom separates into use cases, right? So it's like, what do you want to do with something, and then how do we solve it? I think co-working companies, and I've seen a couple of panels where a co-working guy they're all trying to spin how it's going to be safe, how it's going to be good. A couple of companies have, as people have become more entrepreneurial in their business cases, they've had smaller entities and smaller companies anyway. And so if you can create an environment where you have a pathway to your space that's safe and healthy, they're still going to be fine, and they're still going to foster. Like, again, without kind of jumping all over the place, there are companies that we're looking at that are creating dispersed environments. And so using a co-working space might be an affordable real estate play for them to do that, and not have to take down, several different spaces that are all on their books, that are on their main, it's not just a rent or a lease from a main property owner, it's actually through a co-working space. The other thing that co-working spaces are going to be doing, that just about every industry is going to also trying to be doing, is these a new normal thing is these Zoom calls and GoToMeetings and all those kinds of things are not going away. And so the audio and the visual abilities for these companies to have that over a mom and pop shop that can't afford the good quality AV-IT, co-working space can still offer that as a base package, right? So there's going to be those kind of nuances that they think about, that they still try to separate, but it's always going to come all the way back around to, is the building and the space safe? Am I sharing it with a bunch of people that are sickly, or is everyone healthy?
I think that was really well said, and I want to highlight a couple of things. But first, I would say that, boy, what a tough beginning it was for co-working. When the value proposition used to be, don't sit home in your bedroom by yourself alone with your own fresh air.
Yeah.
Come be with like a bunch of people hanging out and having coffee. It was At first it was kind of a shock thing, but I think
a bunch of strangers, right? You don't know.
A bunch of strangers, but the principle, I agree with Andrew, is definitely going to be even stronger, because co-working really is about flexibility of where you work, and even when you go into a place, the types of work environments in that place, so they can adapt to pods and cleaning schedules and these kind of things. I would say it's still kind of that third, when you think about a company, as Andrew was saying, having a solution for their employees. Well, there's of course the office, and the new type of office, there's home. And then this is, co-working outside of either of those is that third place. And there's going to have to be policy around that. If you're working at a third place by design, I think there's going to be policy around that when it comes to corporate employees. But I will also say something really important that Andrew said, is that in a new Zoom world and Zoom fatigue, notwithstanding the excellent way this looks, AV quality and almost production techniques are going to be more important than ever. And Andrew, I totally agree that the places like co-working and even hotels, and I just came from a conference where there was a fraction of the conference attendees, but there was an unbelievable structure and scaffolding of AV and television quality production. So that is a powerful thought about, you might go to co-working to do that.
Then that comes, there's another question, I guess, comes up on space flexibility and density. In the post-COVID environment, there seemed to be a clear trend towards a hybrid model, allowing the workforce to work fluidly between remote location, including home. And this change in workplace flexibility is critical for planning efficiency, like you were saying, Andrew, and technology, Tom, to control circulation and monitor safety and health to satisfy a more hybrid workforce in office and remote working. But there's some uncertainty as to the real impact in terms of space needs, space area. With less density, more space required per employee, versus remote work allowing reduced workforce to occupy space in a given day, so less space required by employees. So what do you think will be the net impact? And it changes from obviously type of companies and
industries, different industries.
This is better for Andrew, but I will tell you that just when this all first started, there was kind of a spitball kind of thing. Well, fewer people in the office, but more space per people. Let's call it a wash. Just that was the first reaction. Right. What's funny is the studies and the futurists still are trending that way. They're trending, and I've talked to two REITs, two large REITs, just in the past week, who both said, this is public information, one said that they have collected 97.5% of their rent during this period. One said 98. And they said, and even they're even having re-ups, but albeit, different space types and all that kind of stuff. So Andrew, I don't know what you've seen. I would say it's still sorry, I should clarify, in office.
Yeah,
no,
yeah. That's true. I'm gonna, I get the benefit of having these furniture companies that are all scrambling to come up with new solutions. I get to go see them with clients like right now. So last week I was with Hayworth, and they've got their new line of furniture, kind of and they'll appreciate the commercial from Hayworth, but circling around this idea of what they call the third place. And so the third place before the pandemic for most people was Starbucks, okay? Or it was a coffee shop, or it was a place where you could escape the office. You probably didn't work at home as much unless you were a workaholic and took your work home with you. But now the third place is really defined as a lot of things. And so their new product lines are very influenced by residential feelings because of the comfort of home that we've had for the last 7 months, where you were 10 feet away from your personal restroom, or you were 10 feet away from your personal kitchen and your coffee the way you wanted it. And so I think that's going to be something that creeps into the workplace design aspects, is the idea. And I think the way to answer your question, Michelle, is there's really going to be a leveraging of more locations, and one of those being your home, still one of those being probably a Starbucks, but and co-working, and then your sort of a mothership, if you will. There's architecture firms talking about the spirit of collaboration is really important. We have to have our war rooms and our conference rooms and things set up where teams can come meet, but then maybe they go out somewhere else to be more, basically a park anywhere or at home to continue getting good quality, efficient work done.
I have a question on ESG, environmental, social, and governance strategies. As you all know, this is so important. It was actually very important before the COVID crisis. Promoting social and public health, I guess, from the real estate industry, especially in the workplace, goes beyond the building management, obviously. But do you think, and that's for both of you then, do you think this is an additional focus for corporate investors to improve in their ESG strategies? In other words, allowing the health to be part of the S of the ESG investment strategy, do you think?
I think this is just amplifying what was already heading up that way anyway. Healthier daylighting, windows that brought in real light, not tinted weird light that you couldn't even tell what the weather was outside. Better air quality was already creeping up into the equation. It's only going to just skyrocket now. Environmental concerns are going to be with us for, it's funny. It was like the late 80s or the early 90s when people first started talking about sick building syndrome. And, that sort of got dealt with. There's still a lot of older product that I know there's been a lot of retrofitting, but never more than now. There's a lot of sensitivity to every nuance of the healthiness of a building.
And Andrew will kick me under the table because I'm gonna parse words again between environment and environmental.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you talk about ESG, I mean, there's an environment sort of obligation, if you will, but then the environmental is there more CO2 in this room because I'm not feeling very productive?
Right.
And is there Legionella on the water? I don't want that. Right. That's an environmental thing that may not specifically be connected or about your environment. Commitments to the environment.
Yeah, extremely important nuance.
Andrew, I have probably a question that's more design, but I guess it'll touch you as well, Tom. And it's about common areas and public spaces. And you talked of accessing your buildings and your projects now that you're putting a lot of efforts and focusing a lot on those access. And I guess putting into perspective, enhancing your public spaces and your common areas even. Obviously, there is a balance to keep in terms of the economic value and economic sense of your project, of your property, if it's an existing property, and enhancing the common areas and the public spaces. I guess you have to always keep in mind of this between the economy of a project and what you intend to do in terms of enhancing your common areas and public spaces. In other words, if you're going to be expanding on your lobbies and your common washrooms, for example, and your bike parking and
Yeah.
common shower stalls, and it has an impact, obviously, on taking away a bit of possible leasable area. So there's
or just affecting the factors that the lease is based on, right? That those factors could skyrocket if we're not careful.
correct.
You know, I like to look at all kinds of creative solutions. The poor restaurant industry has been scrambling to keep people eating at their establishments, and the streets of New York have been taken over by outdoor seating. I'm sure that's true in Montreal and Dallas and Charlotte. And you know, again, I hate to sort of stick to this outdoor point, but the building owners that we're dealing with were pushing for more outdoor spaces, and environmentally controlling them with heat lamps if it's too cold, or making sure you're not getting rained on was key. We all can't live in San Diego or Seattle or Honolulu, right? But we can figure out different ways to leverage, like, if, you know, think about it this way too. A corporation used to do a break room in the core of the building, and those people would have a break room that they would just check the box and say, here's a break room. They didn't have daylight, they didn't have access to the outdoors. Now it's almost, you have to have a very robust break room on a perimeter, preferably with access to a patio. And I don't care what market you're in. I think that people find ways to, that just feels better. And those common areas are, and BOMA has, I think we talked about this on our call the other day. BOMA has recognized this, and they're now pushing, you know, balconies are leasable. I'm sure tenants are still pushing back some, but if an organization like BOMA stands behind that, and it gives the real estate industry the leverage to lease those spaces, you're getting a benefit for that, and you have a better building.
At the end of the day, it's all about workforce retention to a certain extent. If you have quality of space and a great environment to work, but at the end of the day as well, I guess it translates into your tenant retention.
Yeah, tenant retention is key. Let me add one more point to that too. I know we're separating public health and wellness, but wellness, every landlord and building owner has to sort of check the box and say, I've got a fitness center, or I've got access to something that outdoors where people can go exercise. Again, those have been, the bar keeps getting raised on that. The fitness centers have to meet the level of, you know, if your top execs are going to the country club or they're going to these really high-end fitness centers, what is the other, 90% of the workforce doing? And if you give them an option that, again, creates retention with the tenants, people will spend the money on that, and they'll make sure that it's a plug-and-play technology that can change and be upgraded.
We're past the hour. I just got one more question. I'd like to slip in here. Over the past several years now, our CBDs or downtown cores thrived. People and companies migrated to cities and downtown cores. The impact of the COVID is now somewhat reversing these gains, pushing people to the suburban expert, at least for now, or there's a tendency. Tom, how important is urban planning and development for smart buildings and smart cities in fighting this exodus?
Yeah, well, we have a good handful of customers who are doing just as you said. Again, I'm cautious to say there's a full pendulum swing, but I think you're exactly right about that. Even in practical things like, are these suburban buildings as capable to connect, and are they as smart, and do we have to plan differently, and that kind of thing. So we are seeing that trend, but I will say that, as I said earlier on in my presentation, that the fundamentals, even as we would see urban planning, would still be there for the building. A quick example, if I were going to think about urban planning and smart city, let's say, and we've had many conversations with cities and large developers about a building being able to tell you if a bus is pulling up in 5 minutes, a public bus, or if there was an active shooter, or if there was a severe weather coming, what would the building do? And even have first responders be able to see inside of the building with an iPad to know exactly what's happening when and where. So what we would do in terms of setting up a building for smartness would be really well ready to connect to smart city type environment like that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you so much, both of you. I guess time's up, and it just goes too quickly. And
Yeah, it was fun though.
we should probably do these things for an hour and a half. But anyway, thank you so much, Andrew, Tom. The pandemic is certainly responsible for becoming more than simply an incremental change. Of course, technology in general is not only driving us and use of space and building operations, it's also driving property management, asset management, leasing, valuation, and capital markets. On-demand recordings will be available for most What's Next sessions, including today's. I encourage everyone to visit cre.org/webinars for information on other topical and thought-provoking programs in development, including the presentation of the partnership with ICSC, the International Council of Shopping Centers. Until then, on behalf of the Councilors of Real Estate, thank you for attending What's Next for Real Estate and the Life Experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.